Do you want to hear from one of the most accomplished and inspiring women divers in marine conservation? If so, you're not going to want to miss a second of this episode. Now, my name is Benjamin Hadfield with Teach Me to Dive, and I'm a technical dive instructor, and I am so grateful for you all who have made us on our channel one of the fastest growing diving channels around. So please, let's keep it up. Make sure to subscribe and share this content with your friends and family. Now today, we'll be diving deep into the world of marine ecology and environmental issues that face all of us as divers. Today, we're talking with Samantha Whitcraft, Harvard graduate, marine biologist, environmentalist, and ocean advocate. And she's going to share with us amazing stories, insights, tips on marine ecology. Now, by the way, she's also one of the newest inductees into the Women Divers Hall of Fame. So stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. Samantha, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to talk to you about your amazing career and your passion for the ocean. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So let's just jump into the meat and the potatoes of this. How did you get started into marine conservation and diving?
Well, I like many people in my field, I started out as a water baby. I know and have been told that I could swim before I could walk. I fought against swimming at the surface. I didn't understand why anybody would want to swim at the surface. At the age of 5, I only wanted to swim, hold my breath and swim underwater. And, and then I, as a child, also deeply fell in love with the ocean, everything from, body surfing to snorkeling again when I was like 4 and 5 years old in the Mediterranean. So I was deeply connected for as long as I can remember to the ocean, and never really thought about my future as ever having anything in it other professionally or otherwise other than the ocean. But I didn't have the words or the understanding as a child to know what that might mean. I just felt that. And then I went, started going to school. And by the time I got to high school, that was still what I was really thinking about. But I had figured out through grade school that I was dyslexic. So math and science didn't come easily to me at all. Whereas written words, reading though slow with high comprehension, and writing came very easily. So as a teenager, you're going to do what's easier to get through school, or at least I was. I wanted to do as well as I could, and I wanted to, get through it. So I switched my focus and struggled through the math and science requirements, and then excelled in all the English and arts. So I just got pulled off on that path and ended up going to college the first time I went to college, and ended up getting a degree in English literature and specifically Shakespeare, and got involved in acting and all of that. So then that leads me to what I called like the lost years. They weren't lost. They were wonderful. But I went and lived in Manhattan and tried to be a wham, waitress, actress, model, that whole thing. And had sort of lost touch with the voice inside me that wanted to be with the ocean and be connected in that way. And then my parents had moved to the Bahamas. And so I went to go visit them, and they had bought a little tiny shack kind of house on a beach on a remote island. So I went to visit them. And while I was there, sitting in a bar, and a gentleman came up to me, and best pickup line ever probably said, "Hey, have you ever been swimming with dolphins?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Would you like to?" And I, said, "Does the sun rise and set?" "Yes, of course." So he took me out to this island where they were, I would never do this now. Let me just be clear. This was before I had an understanding about the pros and cons of captivity and marine mammals in captivity and all of that. So that being said, went out to this island where dolphins were being trained for, I think it was one of the cruise ships, something, I don't remember the specifics of it. Anyway, so I went out there and spent 3 days in the water, ignored him. Wasn't interested in him at all, but spent 3 days in and out of the water with the dolphins, had some incredible experiences, learned the very basics of training. And by the time I came back from that trip, everything that I had squashed down about who I really wanted to be and what I really want to do with my life just welled up inside me. And I got home and I was living with my uncle at the time out in Colorado, just to give you an idea of how I was living in a landlocked state. That's how far away I'd gotten from the ocean. And I walked in the door of the house and my uncle said, how was your trip? And I just burst into tears and said, I don't know what to do. All I really want to do is be a marine biologist and it's too late. I think I was 24 or 25. And I was like, it's too late. I've wasted my education and everything. And he just looked at me and he said, you can do anything you want. Like, if that's what you want to do, go do it. And there was something in me that was saying, like, if you don't do this now, you're never going to do, like, at least try, so that when you're 10 years from now, when you're 35, you don't look back and say, well, I should have at least tried. So the only connection I had to academia or the sciences or the study of nature was one book that my father had given me that was by E.O. Wilson, that was called The Diversity of Life, which I had devoured. I loved that book and since have loved everything he's ever written. And on the back, it said E.O. Wilson, professor of biology, Harvard University. And this was back before cell phones, email was nascent, if existing. So I just called the main switchboard at Harvard. Literally, it was like a something 500 number, like a operator answers. And the operator answered, and I said, yeah, can I please have E.O. Wilson's office? Yeah. Shortly after that, he became a technical advisor to President Clinton. So this is not a call you could make. Well, he's no longer with us, sadly. But if you tried to make a similar call today, that it wouldn't go through. But I got patched through, and he actually answered the phone. And I found out later from him it was because his secretary, who they used to call the bulldog because she never let anybody talk to him, was away for the day. So he answered his own phone. And I was so naive that I didn't even understand the magnitude of who I was speaking to. All I knew was that he wrote this wonderful book and he taught at Harvard. I wouldn't make that call today. I had no humility in making that call because I didn't know to have any. So he answered the phone and he was the sweetest, kindest, most generous person in academia I've ever spoken to. And I said, oh, I love your book and I really want to be a marine biologist and was just wondering if you had any advice. And I mean, can you imagine? And he was so kind. And he said, well, you should probably talk to an academic advisor here at Harvard. But in the meantime, I can let you know that there's this program called the Extension School. And it's Harvard's equivalent of like night school, but they have day classes. And it's a good way to get your foot in the door. And you should, order a catalog and find out more about it. And I was like, oh, thank you. I'll definitely do. Never thinking I would do it. And then he said, and if you decide to come here when you get here, do come by. I'd love to catch up with you. And that was the thing that somehow I needed to be invited or something. I don't know. I was young. And so within 3 days, I had called Harvard, found out if I could enroll when I got there. Yes, you could. Here's how you fill out the student loans, paperwork, all that stuff. Packed up my Volkswagen, drove cross country, literally from Vail, Colorado to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and drove straight to the Museum of Comparative Zoology, parked illegally in the parking lot because I didn't even have a student sticker yet, and went straight up to E.O. Wilson's office. Long story short, my first night there, I got invited to an opening of his exhibit about ants at the museum, went and saw him there. He stopped talking to all these incredibly amazing people once I told him my name and, shook my hand with both his hands and welcomed me and said, please check in with me anytime you like. And, congratulations, it's a great move on your part. Anyway, I discovered Harvard and it was like academic Disney World. And because I had transferred my credits from St. Andrews University in English literature and all the work I had done there, all I had to do was the sciences. And once I had proven myself through the extension school, I got into what was called the Special Students Program, which is the worst name for a program ever, but that's okay. It meant that I had access to the full Harvard catalog plus classes at MIT, which meant access to Woods Hole if I wanted to take classes via Woods Hole. So, which I didn't ever directly, but anyway. So once I got in the special students program, I just signed up for every class that had a professor that I admired, or any class that had a field component, any class that was related to conservation. And I actually ended up declaring my major on paper, I think, is natural sciences. But the paperwork that I had to fill out to do the special students program was that I was going to focus on marine conservation biology. And at that point, there hadn't even been a formal national or international symposium for marine conservation biology. It didn't exist as a specialty when I created my field of study to be that. So I had to kind of create that from the courses that were available. And then from there, I mean, that's really where I credit all of my passion and direction is from those amazing courses and experiences and field work experiences and travel that I had through Harvard. I think Harvard gets kind of a rep for being elitist, and maybe some of that is warranted, but I know my experience there was profound in how much it taught me and the experiences I was able to have, and how supportive Harvard was in terms of helping me get, student loans that were fair for what I got, and also scholarships that I got to do field work. My entire senior thesis was based on work I did in Costa Rica at sea turtle nesting beaches. And I wasn't a graduate student, but I got a graduate student grant to cover that travel to do that work in Costa Rica. So I will always be eternally grateful to Harvard and to Professor Wilson and the many other amazing professors I had there. So let me just be clear. No woman or person starting out in a field where they want to do marine conservation biology has to go to Harvard. There are now many institutions that have amazing programs in marine conservation biology. That's just the path that I ended up on and that I took and that I loved deeply.
No worry. Hey, that's awesome, and it's actually amazing to hear the impact. I love the idea that we don't know to be humbled by these people, and how amazing people like you are in this industry. That we're able to just reach out and say, "Hey, I got a question. Would you mind answering?" And that people of your stature and of his stature would say, "Yeah, I've got an answer. I'd love to help you with that." They put their pants on one leg at a time, and just want to help create the community and help others get to the position where they are at. So it's wonderful to hear.
I think that's why I've always really valued having interns or volunteers in the various positions I've been in, because I think one of the most valuable things that anybody in our field can provide is that kind of mentorship and guidance, because it's not built in like it might be in some other professions. Like, we have to create those opportunities.
Absolutely. So let's dig a little deeper. How do you see the impact of climate change on the oceans and its biodiversity? What's happening with the reefs right now?
Yeah. I'm not a climate scientist at all. So all I can speak to is the impacts of what appear to be rising ocean temperatures on coral reefs. And for instance, as most people know, most divers probably know, last summer was a heat wave in many parts of the Caribbean and other parts of the world as well around the equator, because there were record temperatures in the ocean. And corals live or thrive in a very narrow band of temperature. And if that temperature that they're in, that band of temperature goes down even a few degrees for an extended period of time, or up from that band for an extended period of time, they can bleach. Now, bleaching in itself isn't necessarily always a problem. Many corals can recover from bleaching if the amount of time that they're exposed to extreme temperatures beyond that band that they thrive in is limited. So if the temperatures come back to coral normal within a few days to, I think it's as much as 2 weeks. Don't quote me on that. And it probably depends on the coral and the environment and the temperature. There's a lot of nuance. They can recover from bleaching. So quick overview. Bleaching is when corals get so stressed that they expel the symbiotic algae that lives in their tissues called zooxanthellae. And zooxanthellae is actually what gives coral its colors. So many species have zooxanthellae that are specific to that species of coral. So if they can regain their zooxanthellae, then they can recover from bleaching. If they don't stop stressing out from the temperature change and they don't regain their zooxanthellae, then the bleaching can become permanent. That means the coral actually then sloughs off all its tissue and dies. So bleaching incidents throughout my career, so I've been doing this for 30 years, I think I calculated recently. Bleaching incidences have become more common and more frequent than they were, let's say, when I started my career. And that's the challenge. How do we deal with the fact that many corals in many places are under a lot of stress? Now, I just want to say, as an avid recreational diver, that doesn't mean diving isn't good anymore. I was just in Belize this past summer. The diving was great. I was just in the Philippines at Christmas. The diving was great. So we aren't at the point yet where anybody needs to hang up their fins, but we are at the point where it's all hands on deck. Every diver, if they love their local reef or they love traveling to where there are reefs, I would encourage to take 20 minutes, half an hour to look into the one place they love diving most, the one coral reef they love the most, and find out what can they do, what nonprofit is working there that they respect, and how can they get involved. Now, sometimes that's going to be just donate money. And I know that's frustrating to people because everybody wants to do something, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes, like, there are several foundations that are now training divers to work in coral nurseries or to do outplantings. So it's all hands on deck. Find out what you can do and start doing it, because it's going to take everybody working on it.
Sure. What are some of the most urgent threats facing the coral reef? Is it just climate and the hot water, but is there other things that we need to be worried about?
Yeah, I would say that it's increased ocean temperature combined with that exacerbates other stressors, right? So if a reef is already stressed from, let's say, disease, which is another issue. So in the Caribbean right now, a lot of corals are fighting what's called skittle-D, or stony coral tissue loss disease. Um,
Mhm.
so if a reef is already struggling with skittle-D, and then on top of that, there's a high temperature event, that's a lot for a coral to get. So it's like, imagine you had the flu and then you got COVID. Like, one of those at a time, like, you take your vitamin D, you rest up, you're going to probably be okay. But if you get both at the same time, that might be a hospitalization event, right? Because there's only so much an organism can handle in terms of stress. So yeah, I think the biggest threat globally is increased ocean temperatures, but there's other things that are happening at the same time. And then there's the things that corals deal with naturally, like increased sedimentation when there's increased rainflow. So if it's a stormier season and there's more sediment coming out onto a nearshore reef, and it has to deal with removing all that sediment from itself while it's also dealing with temperature, and then it also gets a disease. So, you know, it's a lot, but I think that I think temperature is probably the biggest concern right now. And maybe that, for me personally, that's because it's at top of mind because of what happened this past summer.
Sure. So, how are you educating an aspiring public and the next generation of divers and conservationists about the importance of the ocean?
Right. So the most important thing with non-divers is, I think, to get them underwater. And first choice would be diving, of course, because you get to see more, because you get to go deeper unless you're a free diver. I am a free diver. I also fully advocate for free diving, but I also lead snorkel trips, and so I don't care what it takes to get somebody's face in the water and to get them to fall in love with what's under that shiny, sparkly surface. But for many people, if they've never, other than in an aquarium or on a TV show, really seen underwater and experienced that, the fact that some coral bleach somewhere isn't really going to impact them, right? So one of the most important things is to get people in the ocean in a way. Like I always say, the doorway to caring about the ocean is a mask, because a mask is how you see. So that's for non-divers. For divers or snorkelers or free divers who already love the ocean, many don't really need that much education because there's so much already out there about what's happening. It's not that divers and ocean lovers need to be informed as much about what's happening, um, as much as it is that they might want to learn more about what they can do. Because where stagnation comes in community-based conservation or advocacy for the ocean is that feeling of helplessness. If a diver finds out that their reef is, oh my God, it just went through a bleaching event, and is it going to be okay? And I found out about this, but what can I do? I live in, Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, nowhere near the ocean. What am I going to do? Or even if I do live near the ocean, up in the Northeast or Seattle, how am I going to help a tropical coral reef? And that's where I think we all know in our personal lives that when you're down, the thing that will motivate you is to do something first. Like you're not going to feel better and then do something. You have to do something and then you feel better. It's the exact same thing with conservation and helping coral reefs, or really anything in the ocean that might need help. Maybe your jam isn't coral reef. Maybe your jam is in the peril of right whales, which is a big deal. Or maybe your jam is the overfishing of sharks, also a big deal. But if that's your jam, then, like I said, Google is your friend, or Google Scholar, even better if you want to get into the weeds with like the science that backs up what you're concerned about. But get on Google, start looking up what people are doing. What are the organizations that are achieving something that you think is worthwhile? How can you help them? How can you support them? That's where I think the message needs to get out, is not what's happening to the oceans, but because it's a lot. There's something on every front, right? So mangroves are being deforested at a rate greater than rainforests. Seagrass beds are one of the biggest carbon sinks in terms of ecosystem function in the world, and yet seagrass beds aren't protected in many areas. Sharks are still being overfished now for their meat and their fins. Coral reef, we've just talked about that. So there are issues that need to be addressed across the entire sphere of the marine ecosystem. The question is, which one touches your heart, and how are you as an individual diver or no going to help make a difference? And then the other educational point I would say is informing people why it's important to care about the ocean, regardless of whether or not you're an ocean lover or an ocean recreator, right? So what does the ocean do for us? Well, it helps us breathe. It helps regulate the entire climate. It's a source of protein and livelihood for a huge percentage of the world's population. It's a source of recreation. It's a huge source of economic livelihood when it's healthy. So I think that's a key point in education is, and this needs to get out into the mainstream media more, is the economic value of the ocean to peoples everywhere.
Absolutely. I love what Sylvia Earle says: no blue, no green.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's important.
No blue,
So,
no blue, no breath.
exactly. So you're in a challenging mission, that's for sure. How do you measure and evaluate your effectiveness and the impact of this conservation project?
So at the Sea of, well, it depends if you're talking about like over the course of my career or what I'm doing with Sea of Change right now. Which do you want to talk about?
Let's start with Sea of Change right now.
Okay. So with Sea of Change, we refer to ourselves as small but mighty. And we talk about funding being a fulcrum or seed funding, because we don't generally have enough funds to fund great big like X project kind of initiatives. I wish we could. We can fund what we call community-based conservation. So the reason we do that is because, as we said before, it's the people connected most closely to the resource who are going to be the most invested in making change and evaluating that change and getting benefits from that change. So we have two funding pots. We have our Reef Rescue and Rapid Response Fund, which was the first of its kind, as far as I know, which is if there's been an acute impact to a reef, so a vessel grounding, anchor damage, an oil spill, uh, large fishing net wrapped around a reef, a jetty or pilings that have come loose that are rolling back and forth across a reef. Something that is acute, that can be defined, and that can be addressed by a community. We have a downloadable application. It's one page. You send that to us. We evaluate it, usually within 24 to 48 hours. Once it's approved by our board of directors, we will send you between $500 and $5,000 to immediately address that acute immediate impact to the reef, to mitigate it before it can get any worse. So we've done that in Malaysia with just that. Huge logs had come off a man-made pier or a rustic pier and were rolling across a house reef of a small island that was sea turtle nesting island, a small dive center, and also local fishermen depended on that reef. So we sent them the money so that they could pay a little bit of staff, put gas in the boat, buy some extra lift bags, go out, pull those pilings off the reef. And so immediately, that's an immediate positive impact, getting those pilings off. And they couldn't have done it without that little bit of funding because they don't have extra funding as a conservation organization, a local one that mostly deals with sea turtles, to address that immediately. We could do that. We had a similar event in Grenada a few years ago where an old wreck was breaking apart on a reef, and the wreckage itself was the pieces of the wreckage that were breaking off were destroying the coral. And so we provided them funding to pull that wreckage off the reef, to collect the reef fragments, the coral fragments, and start to grow them out for replanting. So given that example, I would say one of the ways to ensure positive change, and that's why we're called Sea of Change Foundation, is because we work towards positive change, measurable positive change, is to stay local and address immediate concerns. The other way that we do that is we have another funding source called the our Conservation Priority Grant. And that's where it's a larger pot of money that we give out, usually for a 1 year, sometimes a 2-year grant. And that's, again, something we review it very closely so that we know that there are specific goals to be achieved throughout that year or 2 years, and that those goals are measurable. So how many workshops are you going to run? How many children are you going to reach to be involved in this sea turtle nesting beach? How many alternative kinds of sea turtle nesting baskets or boxes are you going to create to replace the polluting styrofoam ones? How many acres of coral are you going to plant? And you need to verify that. So many foundations do this, and I would encourage people when they're considering, or nonprofits, when they're considering who to donate to check that what they're doing has measurable, trackable, positive outcomes. So that's how we do that. Is it ever enough? It never feels like it's enough. But when it's a small foundation, we have to focus on the biggest impact we can make in the most targeted way.
That's awesome. So, what are some of the opportunities that you recommend for divers who want to learn more about marine conservation and environmental issues?
Yeah. So, I guess, again, it depends on, what your jam is. You know, for people who are interested in, well, one of the ways that I got educated in the practicalities of marine conservation is while I was at Harvard, I volunteered and interned at the New England Aquarium, which was one of the most valuable experiences of my life. I learned so much about, in fact, my first 3 dive certifications were through the dive program at the New England Aquarium. So I learned so much about diving. I learned so much about conservation. At that point, my jam was seabirds. So I learned so much about penguins. It turned me into an amateur ornithologist, which is embarrassing, but I do love my backyard birds. And so I would say that the way to get engaged and learn more is to find out where you can get involved in something that you already care deeply about. Because again, from my perspective, it's about engagement. It's about doing. So the more you can do, the more you're going to learn, the more you're going to be engaged. So let's say you're super into restoring coral reefs. There are several groups out there, some regional to different islands in the Caribbean, some more international. There's the Coral Reef Foundation in the Florida Keys. There's Reef Relief, which is more Caribbean wide. There's several similar organizations in the Pacific. Find out, do they have a training program for divers? Many of them do now, and many of them have online. I know Reef Relief has an online training that's sort of like a PADI or an SSI training where you do the first part online and then you go to their facility and you do the last training dives. There's one of those in Bonaire that does a great on-site. It's at Buddy Dive. They have a Reef Relief station there, and you can go and train how to restore corals, how to work in the nurseries, and how to do outplantings. Like I said, if your jam is whales, even if you live up in like New York City, Gotham Whale is an unbelievable small local organization that focuses on collecting data and outreach to boaters about the humpback whales returning to the New York Bight. So wherever you are in the world, I promise you there's somebody or something or some group doing something around the ocean that will speak to you. So the other way you can find out stuff is what's your local university? Google, get onto their webpage and get into their search engine and start searching marine biology, marine conservation, marine ecology, and you'll find hopefully a lab, and there might be a list of professors or students there. Contact them. Are they looking for volunteers? Can you help in the lab? Do they have field work that they might need a volunteer for? So none of this is going to be served to anybody on a silver platter. But I promise, if you put in, like I said, start with 20 minutes on Google and go from there. If you really want to be involved and learn more, you can get there for sure.
So what are you most excited about working on with the Sea of Change and your Aggressor adventures?
I think there's 2 things right now I'm super excited about. One is we've been working with an organization called the Sea Turtle Science Exchange that's based in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And it started 3 years ago. I attended the International Sea Turtle Symposium, which is one of the best marine conservation conferences out there. And I had worked for many years off and on sea turtle nesting beaches in Costa Rica, Mexico, and Hawaii. And the consistent theme across all of those beaches was styrofoam boxes to incubate nests that had to be rescued from inundated beaches or predation events or whatever the case may be. And it always struck me as odd, because one of the most common things you can often see washed up into mangroves and seagrass is little tiny pellets of styrofoam, right? So here we are trying to save sea turtles by incubating their eggs using one of the most polluting products that there is, which is styrofoam. So I met Catherine, who's the head of the Sea Turtle Science Exchange, at this conference. She was giving a presentation. One of her slides, just out of the side, just as a throwaway line, she was like, "Oh, and here's our nursery, and of course we're still using these styrofoam boxes. I wish somebody would come up, I wish we could build a better box." And I was like, why can't we? So I went up to her for a presentation and I said, look, I think, an international competition to build a better box for sea turtle nests, because these styrofoam boxes are being used all over the world. I think that's a great idea. We might have funding for that. So that started, and then we had the competition, and the thing that won was this really cool basket. So then with data loggers, we didn't start with real eggs, obviously. With the data loggers, we found out there were issues with the baskets. So then we lined the baskets, but then there was issues with mold. And so we had to do a different set of data loggers. So we're like into year 3 of this. And we're finally like, it's going to be probably wooden fruit crates, which is amazing because if you've ever traveled around the tropics, wooden fruit crates are everywhere. Everything gets shipped in them. They're by the side of the road. People sit on them to drink their coffee. Like, they're everywhere, and they're cheap and they're readily available. So that project I'm really excited about, because once we figured out the exact methodology for using these wooden fruit crates, we can start reaching out to the sea turtle conservation community and say, hey, you don't have to use styrofoam anymore. Like, here's the data that shows that these sustainable wooden crates are just as good and have just as high survivorship. So I'd say we're a year or 2 from having that data. So I'm very excited about that project. And then the other project I'm excited about is with Aggressor Adventures. We're just in the early stages of it, but we're planning in 2025 a women in marine science and conservation leadership dive trip on the Belize Aggressor. So it'll be a week of women leaders reaching out to women divers. Hopefully we'll attract some young women who are starting out their careers and really have hands-on evening lectures, underwater workshops, all that kind of thing, to promote women leadership in the field of diving and marine conservation.
That's awesome. So, Samantha, let's change gears just a little bit. What are some of the challenges or rewards of being a woman in a male-dominant field of diving and marine sciences?
Yeah. So really interesting. My first job in this field was as a research diver at the Caribbean Marine Research Center that used to have a lab on Lee Stocking Island in the Exumas. So when I got there, when I first got there, it was including the staff, I think it was 12 guys, men, and me. The only other woman on the island was the cook. And she wasn't terribly friendly, or I was intimidated, or both. I'm not sure. So there were some things that happened, none of them untoward, and none of them meant to be unkind. But, it was probably more about the new person on the island more than it being a woman, just different pranks and stuff. But as a woman, and small of stature, I'm only 5'2". I think soaking wet, I weighed 110 pounds then. So I was easily intimidated, and so I was intimidated, but I still got the job done, and then and learned a lot the hard way, believe me. And then, because I was hauling tanks, filling tanks, loading boats, everything, and the diving and the research and the collecting data and entering the data at night. I mean, they were 14-hour days, 6 days a week for almost 4 months. But then two months in, a woman joined, Kazarina McKinney, who's now a leader in her own right in marine conservation. And it was a relief to have another woman there. We bonded pretty quickly, and kind of had each other's back. So that was at the beginning. So that was 30 years ago, something. And I can say, by the time I went to graduate school at the University of Miami to get my Master's of Marine Affairs and Policy. And when I was in that program, it was more women than men. I think it was like over 60% women to men in my class at for marine policy. And so that made it very, and then I managed a Marine reserve in Hawaii. And when I was managing that reserve, I put together an internship program there. And I didn't do it intentionally. It just so happened that every single person who applied for that internship was a woman, a young woman. So I had 14 female interns when I was managing that reserve. So I've seen a change over the course of my career. And I don't mean to say at all, nor do I believe that the field needs to be, that it matters whether the field is dominated by men or women. What matters is how good the work is, and that the work is getting done, and that we're moving the needle in marine conservation in a meaningful way. But I am interested in women having the space and the opportunity to be involved in a meaningful way, and not to have to feel or not necessarily feel intimidated. And I think we're in a really good place with that now.
So as you move forward as a woman in this male-dominated environment, and just with your career in general, what was the loudest voice you heard in your head, and how'd you quiet it?
The voice of doubt? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think I didn't even know what this was until I read about it a few years ago, but there's something called imposter syndrome, where there's a voice inside your head that says you're not good enough, you don't belong here, somebody's going to find you out. I had that distinctly throughout my entire time at Harvard. I was sure I would be sitting in Widener Library or working in the MCZ, and somebody was going to, the Museum of Comparative Zoology. And I was sure somebody was going to come up and tap me on the shoulder and go, Miss Whitcraft, we've reviewed your record, and you're going to have to leave the university. Like, just, I was like, I need to get everything done. And I need to graduate before somebody finds out that I obviously don't belong here. And I felt it less once I graduated, but I definitely felt it when I was at also, because the Rosenstiel School is also pretty prestigious. And I was working at NOAA at the time, and the contract that I was working for with NOAA provided for the tuition for my master's at which was I was until 2 years ago still paying off my Harvard loans. So there was no way I could have paid for a master's as well. So the fact that I had gotten into this program at NOAA that was paying for my master's, again, I was sure somebody was going to come up to me and say, yeah, no, we meant somebody else, not you. And I think the way I got over it, and I don't know if this is healthy, I don't know if this is the way anybody else should do it, was I just was like, if I just keep going and I keep my head down and I do the work and I don't draw too much attention to myself, then I will get it done and I'll be in a place where I can make a difference. So that's how I got through that. I worked as hard as I possibly could to do the best that I possibly could to prove to myself, and I thought I had to prove to the world that I was worthy. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So how do you cope with the stress and pressures of diving in challenging and demanding environments?
I'm a princess diver. My days of hauling tanks and hot bunking and training to be a NOAA diver and all, I've done some pretty intense diving in my life, and I've done a lot of it. Those are kind of over for two reasons. One, I'm old, and I just, I get a sore back like anybody else. And there's three reasons. Three, I work with Aggressor Adventures. And so most of the time when I dive from an Aggressor yacht. And I don't know if you're aware, but I affectionately refer to that as princess diving, because I never have to lift a tank. I set up my gear once. I get out. There's a hot shower on the back deck. I get a warm cup of coffee or cocoa or something after each dive. I get a warm towel. I mean, it's so night and day from how I started out diving, that I always tell people, if they are research divers or hardcore divers, I'm like, definitely go on Aggressor liveaboard, but just know it will change you as a diver. Like all those, like, I got to be tough. All those muscles, at least in me, I was like, maybe I don't need or want to do that so much anymore. So I'm very grateful to Aggressor for that, because I would. I mean, I love being in the ocean enough that I would haul tanks for the rest of my life to make that happen. But I'm very blessed and fortunate and grateful that I don't have to do that. And I guess the other thing is, I'm a very I set my dive computer to very conservative limits. Um, I always take an extra minute on my safety stop if I've gone, below 90 feet. I'm just very, some people would say overly cautious, but diving and being underwater is so important to me that I would rather just be overly cautious and know that, like Stan Waterman or Sylvia Earle, that I can dive into my 90s, if I live that long, hopefully. So yeah, that's my philosophy.
So who inspired your diving journey?
Oh, Holly Martell Bourbon, or Bourbon, depends how you pronounce it. She is now the dive safety officer at the National Aquarium. Yeah. But she was the head of diving at the New England Aquarium when I was there while I was at Harvard. And she taught me open water, advanced, and rescue. And she's also in the Women Divers Hall of Fame. And the fact that she wrote me a recommendation letter meant as much to me as any award. She's a phenomenal woman. She's an amazing diver. She's no end of knowledge about diving itself and also about the ocean environment. She would be my greatest influence for sure.
That's awesome. So finally, what are some of your goals you have for the future of your diving and marine conservation?
I think it's to continue to inspire and mentor women, that the next generation that's coming up, because I thought that my generation had a lot of challenges ahead of us. The challenges for the next generation are tenfold what we had. So any insight or guidance that I might be able to provide, I'm very eager to provide that. And then, my bucket list of reefs that I want to see is not done. I have not seen any of the reefs in the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean yet, so that's very high on my bucket list. Or the Great Barrier Reef, which is insane that I haven't been there yet. But I'm very grateful for the incredible reefs that I have seen in the Gardens of the Queen in Cuba, Palau, Raja Ampat. I mean, these are world-class, unbelievable, well-protected coral reef ecosystems. But yeah, I think seeing some more reefs while I'm still able-bodied and can still do the long-haul flights, because this last one back from the Philippines, man, I was like, oh, that's what it feels like to cross that many time zones when you're my age. So yeah, I think, and also, continue through the Sea of Change to make funding available to communities that want to make a significant difference, a measurable positive change in association with their coral reefs. That's very important to me, and I want to keep doing that.
That's amazing. Samantha, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. It was such a pleasure. Reach out anytime.
Absolutely. Well, there you go, guys. Kevin, we have Samantha Whitcraft. It was amazing. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to do a shout out to the Sea of Change. If people are interested in supporting or getting involved with the Sea of Change, we're at www.seaofchange.com. So feel free to check us out anytime.
Absolutely. We'll put that in the descriptions below to make sure to click on their link as well and get them over to there so we can help in any way we possibly can. What's one simple thing that the viewers can do that can help you?
Donate to the Sea of Change Foundation. We're doing amazing work. And one of the things that's unique about the foundation is that 100% of every dollar you put in goes to conservation. There is no administrative overhead. Not even my salary comes out of those funds. It all goes directly to the communities doing the conservation work.
That is worthwhile all to itself. That's amazing. So guys, please donate. And I'll make sure to put up some links on our Facebook page, our Instagram, as well as this YouTube of where you can go to donate and put some money in to see if change. We as divers, this is important to us. Let's give back with our wallets and our hearts as well. So Samantha, thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Again, Benjamin Hadfield, Teach Me to Dive. Make sure to check out in the description here more information about See a Change. Go to their social, go to their website, and support them in any way you can. Again, thank you so much.